it's a remarkable story. I was astonished when I saw the story being shared yesterday on Wednesday, as reported by Iranian state media. Let that be said as well, that the chief of our defense force was in Tehran, and that he made all these quite fantastical statements saying that South Africa stands shoulder to shoulder with Iran, that South Africa has always worked with Iran, that we support Iran in its resistance, and I quote, we support Iran in its resistance to global arrogance and imperialism. Now, it doesn't sound like typical language that a South African military leader would use, but that's how it was reported in Iranian state media. It has not yet been refuted by the Department of Defense or the National Defense Force, which means that the Iranian version stands, Graham. And like you said in your intro, this comes at a time when we're trying to salvage what is left of a fraught relationship with the Americans, and this will no doubt get their backs up.
Right. Let's also just quickly, before we move on, Pieter, go through one of the other comments that the general had made, according to, as you say, Iranian state media. He also referenced the ICJ case South Africa had brought against Israel, also sort of referencing that, a very big sort of hot geopolitical potato, if you will. I mean, These are topics that you wouldn't think a general in the military would touch on. This would be left to our foreign minister like Ronald Lamola. Why is he talking about these things?
Well, Graham, absolutely, and what's worse is that the according to the reports from Iranian state media, we're going to caveat this throughout the whole conversation, is that the chief of the defense force said this wasn't only a military visit to Iran, it also carried a political message. Now, the problem is that the military, in a constitutional democracy like ours, is under civilian control. The military does not involve itself in either domestic or international politics. And in this instance, according to what the chief of the defense force said, he's very clearly stepped over a line where he physically he vocalized his entry into the terrain of politics and international politics and very complicated and contested and fraught geopolitics. So, he is completely in over his head. There are serious fears or serious concerns at DIRCO, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, around how this trip was arranged, who approved it, what the circumstances were, because foreign policy is the purview of the minister and the president, not the Minister of Defense, and most certainly not a military officer who is under civilian control and who should never venture into politics. So, this is a diplomatic faux pas. This is a political problem, and this is something that should, Graham, I think, lead to a very strong rebuke of the general.
Right. And we've had the two departments in question here that should have some accountability, which is both defense and international relations, since coming out as per the reporting on News 24 this morning, Pieter, basically stating we distance ourselves from it. I think the defense ministry has called it sort of unfortunate, as well.
Which is putting it very lightly.
100%. And Minister Ronald Lamola basically stating this is not the official foreign policy position of the country. They now have to clean up this mess somehow. But it's not beyond the pale of what the ANC has basically stated in the past. Ronald Lamola is an ANC minister. We've had the ambassador come to Luthuli House earlier this year. And then we've had the ANC's Nomvula Mokonyane previously in the past saying, why would we hide our friends?
Graham, two things in response to what you said. One, the statements issued by DIRCO and the DOD, that's cold comfort. The damage has been done. The visit should not have happened. And if there was military contact between the two nations, because we do have, as someone at DIRCO did remind me last night, we do have functional diplomatic relations between the two countries. If there was official contact, it should not have been managed in the way that it was was now. So, issuing statements afterwards, the damage has already been done. The way in which has been received in Washington, which leads me to my second point, the way in which it has been received in Washington and the way in which it is being framed, certainly in the reports that we've seen, not been refuted by the Department of Defense, is that we are from a position where we were maintaining a sort of a neutrality towards Iran, not being active participants in the conflict between Iran and the United States. This general has now put us almost into active duty, shoulder to shoulder with the Iranians, saying that we support you in your resistance in the global fight against arrogance and Western imperialism with reference to the United States. So a week ago, we were friends with Iran, but we were not active participants. Now the general has put us in between the United States and Iran, and we certainly don't want to be there, because you have a president in the United States that we don't know what his next move might be, but the position that they've taken, the stance they've taken against us, is antagonistic. We are under the heel of the Americans as far as trade relations are concerned. They don't trust us, we don't trust them, and this certainly did not help, Graham.
100%, Pieter. And then you've got, which I thought was very interesting, comment from defense analyst Helmut Heitmann. Of course, he's often the go-to for us in the media, because he speaks very much from a pragmatic sort of independent.
He knows the defense force inside out. Yeah, he's our foremost defense expert.
And he's like, I've met the general before. It sounds he's a fairly, nice gentleman, what have you. He sticks to what he knows. But, in Helmut's view, and this is what I also felt, and it's not confirmed, obviously, but, surely somebody had directed the general to go on this trip in the first place, because when the general meets his counterpart in Tehran, he says, I bring you greetings from the defense minister and the presidency.
So yes, I think if we were to be charitable towards the general, we could say that the only reporting of the comments that he made came from the Iranians. We have no perspective from the South Africans of that meeting, of what was said. Did the general really agree and concur, and also use the words resistance against global arrogance and Western imperialism? Would he have said that? I don't know. I'm not so certain. But it hasn't yet been disputed or denied by the Defense Department, nor the Army, nor the Defense Force, nor DIRCO, nor the presidency, I might add. If the general did not say those things, they should have come out on Wednesday night saying that, we distance ourselves from this reporting in Iranian media. We did not say that. We went there because of reason A, B, and C, and we're certainly not about and readying ourselves to fight shoulder to shoulder with the Iranians, because that's the impression that was created. So it is a crisis. It's a problem for the military. And Graham, I think it's a problem as far as command and control is concerned. The military over the last couple of months seems to have started to flex its muscles. It launched an attack on National Treasury during an appearance in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, which was also out of character. Today, on Thursday, there's a statement issued by the Department of Defense related to a visit to Simonstown to the Chief of the Navy by the Russian naval attaché from Pretoria. So, if they're playing politics, they're not playing it very well, and it's putting this country in a very difficult position.
Right. And you only really need to go listen to the past editions of The Lead, Pieter, to understand the level of reporting that's, our senior investigative journalist, Sikonati Manchancha, has brought to the table, looking a lot closer at the state of our Navy as well as our Air Force. It leaves a lot to be desired. We really should not be making such major, political statements from members of the military.
No.
And yes, you got Minister Angie Motshekga going to the NCOP and saying, if we had to be attacked today, we would be able to defend ourselves. But the reporting speaks for itself, right, Pieter?
It does, Graham, and you being a student of politics and history, once military men start getting frustrated with the state of their guns, the size of their tanks, the ability of their ships, their warships, and fighter jets to do what needs to be done. Then a country starts moving into dangerous territory. There are many examples in Africa and in Europe where, when the military starts becoming irritable, frustrated, then the tension between military leadership and political leadership starts becoming a problem. We need to prevent that. And that's why it's important that the president, as the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, the ultimate leader, commander of the National Defense Force, comes out very strongly and either rebukes the chief of the Defense Force or removes him from his position. Otherwise, this stands. And we simply cannot afford to see tension between the political leaders, military leaders, in a constitutional democracy. Given the state of the country, I think it could be a recipe for disaster. And I'm certainly not warning against a coup at all, but I am concerned about the state of the military and the state of politics in the military and between the military leaders and politicians.
And if we look towards the US side of things, but that, of course, we're now under officially 30% punitive Trump administration's tariffs. We have no new deal on the table. Of course, Ronald Lamola has been at pains with Parks, Tower and Co. to try and get some new deal. Apparently, Washington's not been very forthcoming. The DA hasn't had its person in the ring. It's still trying to follow Andrew Whitfield's position. And then there's human rights report comes out from Washington.
Well, yes. I mean, Trump is looking for any stick to beat us with. Now, a human rights report released on Tuesday, the day that the general was in Tehran. This human rights report was written by a close confidant of Trump, someone who is marinated in the MAGA movement. Of course, we know that the South African right has done a lot of lobbying and propaganda work in Washington, really fanning the flames around the assault on white South Africans, genocide, attacks on white people, farm murders. That whole environment has really been activated in America. The MAGA movement have really taken to that. Now, all of that has found resonance in this human rights report, which Trump will now use to beat us with even further, because it will, of course, become part of American foreign policy doctrine. So we're in a tight spot. So on the same day that the Americans formulate policy related to our supposedly dire human rights record, we go to Iran. This is at the same time, Graham, might I add, that a contentious bill is winding its way through the U.S. legislature in the Capitol, which seeks to completely revamp its relations with South Africa. So as far as us and the United States are concerned, we're in a terrible position.
Right. And then I'd also just, add, somebody might be listening thus far and be like, well, the ANC's also always been having good relations with Iran. It's stretching back all the way to the 1970s during, some of the darkest periods under the Vorster regime during apartheid. But we're veering into completely different territory, right? We have to start separating party politics from what actually is the foreign policy stance, notwithstanding in a government of national unity, a coalition, right?
Yeah, look, the Iran's historical support for the ANC is quite tenuous, to be honest. I mean, Iran was engaged in its own revolution in the 1970s, if you'd recall, and there wasn't really any time to spend on the aspirations of an African liberation movement. It's a modern relationship which is rooted in the global South, rooted in the ANC and Iran's shared rejection of what they call American imperialism, but it is not serving the national interest as I see it. Of course, the ANC-led government might see it completely differently. And I think, Graham, we're going to have to start considering, and I said that to our colleague Carol Payton in a conversation earlier, we're going to have to start considering that this might actually be where our foreign policy is headed. We shouldn't discount that. The Americans are antagonistic towards us. They are punishing the country for a range of reasons. South Africa's response could be, and might, should be to pivot somewhere else. Whether it should be to Iran is a different question. But I think it's quite feasible and quite possible that we're going to have to start accepting, or considering at least, that this is where our foreign policy is headed. We're going to find ourselves and position ourselves in the orbit of a theocracy and a authoritarian regime like Iran.
Right. Notwithstanding the fact, of course, we haven't even found a replacement yet for Ibrahim Rasool, also put his, foot in it, and perhaps overextended his mandate quite a lot. Back home, the argument I always say, Peter, just to sort of end off, perhaps we get too internationalist with these things. And yes, we are reacting to quite massive statements made abroad. But here back home, we could say that foreign policy could be discussed at our upcoming national dialogue, but it looks like people are pulling out left, right, and center.
Yeah, no, the national convention starts tomorrow in Pretoria. It'll be hosted at UNISA, and it's going to be gathering under a cloud. I think the credibility of the convention is being questioned. I think the fact that so many interested parties, civil society organizations have already withdrawn from the convention means that, I don't hold out much hope for it. I'm, to be quite frank, not even very interested in it. Yesterday on Wednesday, a letter came out from the, a letter was issued by the deputy president sent to all ministers and deputy ministers saying that they shouldn't attend because of space constraints, which is a very feeble attempt to save face, I think, because it might turn out to be a disaster, and they don't want members of the executive attending something like that. So let's see what happens. I think it's an attempt by the government to co-opt the rest of South Africa into failures that we've seen over the last 10 years. But let's see what happens. I'm just glad I'm not going to be at UNISA tomorrow.
Now, why can't we take all the multi-millions for this event and plug it into real projects that can help people with the housing crisis here in the Western Cape, for example?
This is
delivery woes in Johannesburg.
I have to say, this is such a cosmetic exercise, and it's so transparent. We elect parliamentarians who take their seats in the 400-member National Assembly and in the 180-seat National Council of Provinces. We have councillors in every city, ward, municipality. We've got a vibrant media environment. A national dialogue and a national debate is taking place every single day. What we need is an efficient government to execute on the mandate given to it by the electorate, i.e., securing our borders, securing our physical integrity of our persons and homes through a functional criminal justice system, and providing goods and services paid for by the taxpayer. And then the national dialogue can take place in Parliament, on the pages of News 24 and newspapers and the media, and in council. That's where the national dialogue takes place. This is cosmetic, and I think it's transparent.
You missed out one, Pieter. It's an actual Q&A session with the president, so we can ask him why his general of the National Defense Force went all the way to Iran to say all of these things when it's not his place to say it.
Hasn't happened in 7 years, my man. It hasn't happened in 7 years.
And that is Pieter du Toit. He's the editor for Investigations here at News 24. His latest opinion piece, Fires Everywhere, Rogue General Courting Iran Must Be Reined In. Pieter, baie dankie, ek waardeer dit. Lekker naweek.
Thanks, Graham.